Looks like we have a number of people jumping in to join us today's webinar. So we'll just wait another couple of minutes for our attendees to get settled. Okay, we've got everyone joining in. We'll just keep waiting another moment till we have everyone settled. And I think we should see my screen up there. Is that all good? I can see a thumbs up coming up there. It's wonderful.
Okay, so maybe let's make a start, Natalie.
I think we can kick off. Yes, thank you. So we have a lot of attendees coming in today, and the presentation is the Australasian College of Road Safety webinar on vehicle safety standards, and it's really quite relevant at the moment. To begin with, I'm going to hand across to Ingrid. So thank you, Ingrid Johnson, who is the CEO of ACRS.
Thanks, Natalie. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know we've got people joining from all over Australia and New Zealand, and in true college style, really good mixture of people from government, academia, industry, and advocacy organisations. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respects to the many First Nations peoples of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Maori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, work, and learn, and pay our respects to the elders who've passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to the future generations. May this sharing of knowledge through Maturanga Maori and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being, and doing guide you with wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. And I'm joining today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Canberra. So welcome and thanks everyone for joining us. Back over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Ingrid. So I'm your facilitator for today. My name is Natalie Roberts. I'm the Managing Director of APMARC, and I'm really pleased. Thank you for the invitation to facilitate. Thanks also to our attendees and presenters. And I did see someone pop up in the chat that they're from Poland. So great to have you on as well. I think what's really important to start is to think about what the vision of the Australasian College of Road Safety is, and that is the elimination of fatal and serious injuries on the road. So vehicles are playing an increasingly important role to achieve this objective due to the rapidly advancing benefits, in particular that driver safety assist technologies can provide when deployed on vehicles at scale. And if you think about deploying technologies at scale, you need those effective technologies, and they need to have a level of being mandated, and also they must meet some minimum performance metrics, and that can be achieved through vehicle safety standards or the Australian ADRs, which is the subject of today's webinar. What I find really interesting is I've worked in automotive engineering for more than 20 years, and I've never seen technology and regulation evolving as rapidly as it is today. And to provide you with a little bit of context on that, at the moment, there are more than 20 UN ECE regulations just related to driver safety assist and assisted driving that are current, with implementation dates from 2022 through to 2024. So that's really significant. You know, we have a bit over 100 ADRs in Australia, for example. In Australia, about 8 of those related to driver safety assist and assisted driving are being regulated or are in draft form. So growing significantly in terms of both the technology and also regulation around it. In April, held in Japan, was the 27th International Technical Conference on the Enhanced Safety of Vehicles. And this was really the bringing together of the global community of safety experts working across both passive and active safety, regulation, research, vehicle manufacturers and the like. And they came together to share innovative advances in motor vehicle safety. And today we're going to see a little snapshot of some of the learning from that conference, which is really exciting. And also we're going to hear about what the Commonwealth Government is doing to help assist the road safety strategy objectives. So we have some housekeeping as well. So the webinar is 60 minutes. It's going to be recorded and it's going to be shared with you all after the presentations. We're going to hold the questions until the end of all of the presentations, and we have 4 presenters. If you would like to ask a question in that panel session, if you have a look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little icon there with a Q&A. That's where you can click on that and you can type your question. Now, we've got a great feature on there today, and that's where you can upvote other questions. So if someone's asked a question that you're really interested in, you can upvote that and that will move up the list. And during that panel session, which will be held after our presenters, we'll select a number of questions to run through. Now, you'll also have the ability to, you can see there's another little icon that says chat. Now, if you click on the chat button, this will just be communicating with the community that's on the webinar today. This chat won't move through to the Q&A session. So please be aware if you're asking the questions that they go through the Q&A icon. Great. Now moving to our presenters and panellists. First up, we have Carla. She's the CEO of ANCAP, and it's a role she's held for nearly 3 years now. Prior to working at ANCAP, Carla worked in highly complex roles in finance, where she was heavily involved in standards regulation and development of product. And I think really interesting for Carla's time at ANCAP, she and her team have implemented the driver safety assist protocols. And today there are more than 600 test scenarios for the active safety features. Many of these test scenarios and tests actually precede vehicle safety regulations. So ANCAP's a really nice progression to the deployment and uptake of these technologies on vehicles. So I'm going to ask Carla, if you can please, with your presentation, to start sharing the screen.
Testing all of my IT skills.
It's wonderful. You're up.
I'm up. Great. So do you want me to kick off?
Yes, please.
Thanks, Natalie. And thanks for the lovely introduction. And thank you to Ingrid for organising today's webinar. I'm really happy to be able to come and share what we learnt at ESV, which for me was the first time I'd attended. Being relatively new to ANCAP, I'd not had the chance to attend. The previous conference was in Eindhoven in the Netherlands in 2019. So long time between conferences, and that was part of the reason why ANCAP was really keen to send what was relatively large contingent for us over there, with our technical engineering team and some of our senior leadership team joining as well. We took that opportunity because it was in Japan. We'd saved up a bit of travel budget over the COVID period and took that opportunity because usually these conferences are a bit further away. So it was a good one for us to be able to take a few more people than normal too. And I think, you know, ACRS really, you'd be quite familiar with the work that goes on in vehicle safety research and development. Australia's fairly isolated. We've got a small research community, and I'm, also aware of the work that goes on in New Zealand too. Most of the leading edge vehicle safety research is occurring overseas just by virtue of the fact that we are so much smaller in this neck of the woods. And when you look at places like, Germany and some of the American work that goes on, they're dealing with much bigger populations. So our network of researchers is necessarily representative of our smaller population. So I think that was really interesting to see how much work is going on in vehicle safety. ANCAP is part of the SAFE system. We are the vehicle safety component. Most of the conversations that we attend when we're talking about road safety in general are focused predominantly on roads, building roads, making roads safer, all of those things that many of the people on this call will have fantastic expertise in. And that's really, really important. And for Australia and New Zealand, we have such large road networks, and we don't manufacture vehicles. So that sort of makes sense. But for ANCAP, because that's what we do, we really need to be across what's happening at the forefront of this work. And ESV was a great opportunity for us to really see that firsthand. I think some of the other, reasons for attending is that connection with academic and technical peers. And for us, that ranges across both the sort of research groups that are out there doing this research day to day, and also the vehicle manufacturers. A lot of these people, move from one part of the industry to another. So they might be academic researchers in one role and then moving into vehicle safety at a manufacturer in another. Many of the people that we know have worked at one of the NCAPs as well. And, people move in and out of these roles and around the vehicle safety space. But over that 4-year period, there's not been a lot of connection other than the meetings, for example, that we have, regular meetings with Euro NCAP. But outside of that, it's really hard to get that connection, especially with the time zones that we're in. So we got some fantastic senior level collaboration with our NCAPs. There was a global NCAP sideline meeting where we got to hear from all the other NCAPs around the world and what they're up to, what they're doing, how they're progressing. And we also were involved in senior meetings with manufacturers. So JAMA, which is the Japanese Manufacturing Association, had an NCAP sideline meeting, which was a high level senior meeting with their chairman and board of directors. So that was, the kind of thing that you just can't replicate really on a Zoom call, and we took that opportunity very seriously, and I think it was excellent experience for our team and the development of our more junior engineers as well. So what did we take away? What did we learn? I hadn't been, as I mentioned, to one of these before, so the country updates were actually really fascinating for me, that each country's sort of governmental representatives get up and give at the very, very beginning of the session on the first day an update for each of their jurisdictions. It was interesting that Working Party 29 gets mentioned a lot, and talking to some of my team who've been to many ESVs in their career, that wasn't always the case. So, there's a bit of a trend there, or that movement that you see over many years of a conference and the changing dialogue that occurs. So that really is considered an enabler of jurisdictional vehicle safety improvements. The other thing that I've found interesting is that the regulatory ambitions remain high, even in countries like Germany, where, they are regulating or further ahead than many other jurisdictions in places. They're looking at expanding their truck AEB regulations, which have been in place for 10 years. That was something that I found interesting because we're at the process of, regulating that at the moment in Australia. Japan, grappling with this aging population and all of the vehicle safety consequences that come from that. That's instructive for us. Australia has a similar demographic profile. We are not as big and we are not aging as fast as Japan, but it is similar. So some of the things that we're seeing in Japan are a real lead indicator for where our potential future vehicle safety issues are going to go. And this pedal misapplication problem is huge in Japan, and a real issue that they're struggling to deal with. And we saw this little ACRS down here has been set up with some technology to stop that from happening. We also saw some interesting alternate perspectives on Australian regulations. And I'll say that as Australia, because New Zealand obviously operates a little bit differently from a regulatory perspective. But Volvo took quite an exception to our restriction on booster cushions, and were very adamant in terms of their perspective that it is better to have someone in or have a child in a booster cushion than nothing at all. And that's what ends up happening. Booster cushions are simple and easy to take with you in public transport and put into Ubers and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of arguments put forward by the speaker from Volvo around that. I think the other kind of takeaway is that, and this might be one of those trends that you see over many years in a conference, is that the vehicle safety conversation is not just about passenger cars. Passenger cars are a large portion of the discussion, but there is work going on across heavy trucks. There's work going on in terms of vulnerable road user protection from the perspective of not just pedestrians, but cyclists and now motorcyclists, and also micro-mobility. But the presentations from Euro NCAP on safer trucks, and also the new motorcycle vulnerable road user testing, which is coming in or has come in for ANCAP as well from the beginning of 2023. Those two presentations went into the deep dive around how the scenarios have been come up with, what technologies have been chosen and why. And it's all been based on really, really detailed crash statistics where technologies are being put forward and proposed because they know that they can alleviate some of the potential future crashes. I think the other key learning or takeaway was that cabs are still a really long way off. They're very niche use case scenarios that are being proposed and discussed. So that was something that I think, given the focus in so many areas around cabs and where they're going, to see really what the limitations are and really where the cutting edge of technology and cutting edge of research and development at this conference, it's still not quite at the point where you can see it rolling out in any way, shape or form broadly. But absolutely those cases where, you might have stretches of highway or particular areas cordoned off where those technologies can operate, that's very much in the near term. So really those were my key takeaways. I might hand over to Natalie now. Thank you.
No, that's really great. And I think, some of the points that you've made about all the work that's been done with the new targets and the vulnerable road users is, really interesting, and the application across vehicles. And CAV's been a long way off. That's a takeaway for me from that discussion too. Mm-hmm. So now we have Blake Harris presenting, and Blake is the Acting Manager of Vehicle Safety, Innovation and Technology at TAC. And he has significant experience in automotive research, and he commenced that journey in automotive with RACV in the policy team, very much automotive and technology based. And then he followed that up with work with Vic Roads and now the TAC. He's going to talk about the work that the TAC does in the area of vehicle safety. Blake, if you could now share your screen, please. Great.
Yeah, hopefully that's working.
Okay, yes, it is. Wonderful.
Thanks, Natalie, and thanks to Ingrid and the ACRS for organising the webinar. I'd heard of ESV over the years of doing work in vehicle safety, and had read papers from the conference, but I think it was really great to head over to Japan for the event. It was the first time I'd been as well. I don't think I've attended a conference that had such a great mix of representation from governments and researchers, and in particular vehicle manufacturers. I was very fortunate to attend the ESV on behalf of the TAC without actually having a paper to present. However, there were 3 Australian papers that were physically presented at the conference, and the TAC has some involvement with all of them. Michael Fitzharris of Monash University Accident Research Centre presented on the outcomes of the landmark Enhanced Crash Investigation Study. This TAC funded study took an incredibly detailed look at 400 drivers who were seriously injured in crashes in Victoria. ACRS generated a list of 278 countermeasures that could help to address the crashes that were investigated. And this paper provided detail around the development of the countermeasures and the way that they were categorised using a modified version of the integrated safety chain. It also won the award for the longest title, or it would have if there was one. Helen Lindner of Mobility and Accessibility for Children in Australia presented on their Australian Safety Assessment Program for Child Restraints designed for children with disabilities. With the support of the TAC, this program developed protocols and conducted tests of special purpose child restraints. MACA's program provides occupational therapists and families with information about the safety of these restraints, which is otherwise lacking. This program has already had a big influence in the Australian market, with new products coming to market as a result of it. And Sam from the Centre of Automotive Safety Research will present on his paper today on event data recorder work. We weren't directly involved in this paper, but I'm going to claim some degree of support for this because we've previously worked with CASA to gain insights from this database, and we're working with the team to help build this important resource. Michael, Helen, Sam and their teams have put a huge amount of effort into these initiatives, and we were very happy to see them presented on a global stage. I should also note a 4th paper by Vehicle Design and Research on smartphone-based ADAS was in the proceedings. However, unfortunately, David Payne was unable to present. Now that I have those important acknowledgements out of the way, the broad technical program made it difficult to choose what to focus on. There were papers on emerging theories all the way through to technologies that are already in the market. So I'll try to focus on 2 topics that I think are important: auto emergency braking for vulnerable road users, and the proposed requirements for future vehicles and the speeds at which they'll travel at in a safe system. There are a few papers focused on auto emergency braking systems capable of detecting vulnerable road users. Some highlighted benefits, and there were identification of limitations that should also be addressed. This paper by Colgren used the Swedish Strata database to analyse crashes between vehicles and pedestrians or cyclists from 2015 to 2020. I've cheekily used a photo of one of their slides from the conference because this nice graph wasn't included in the paper, so apologies for the skew. They found overall benefits of 8% for pedestrian detecting AEB and 21% for bicycle detection, which was statistically significant. They noted that the pedestrian sample in this database had a lot of low speed parking crashes, parking area type crashes, and that perhaps AEB wasn't as effective in this environment, or maybe it was being overridden by drivers in these environments. So the benefits might be understated. And I think that's backed up by other research we've seen into pedestrian AEB, which found greater benefits. Darkness or nighttime is proving to be a challenge for AEB VRU systems. And this is found in this paper and also recently reported by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety in the US. There was a curious outcome for poor weather, which they noted required further investigation. As potentially that the AEB was detecting things that drivers weren't, or it was a bit of a strange one, that one. Another interesting paper on pedestrian AEB was presented by Transport Canada. They conducted over 1,000 off-road tests using 13 different 2019-2020 vehicles and 24 test configurations. They looked at different environmental variables such as snow and light conditions, and they also used different combinations of clothing and accessories for pedestrian targets. The clothing and the test conditions for AEB are standardised, so this program was aiming to test the effects of moving away from those standards. The testing found that increasing the complexity with additional targets, parked vehicles, and challenging environments unsurprisingly decreased the performance of the system. There was a limited number of scooter tests, which were found to perform similarly or better than the baseline. Tests with big changes to the silhouette of the target caused issues for the systems. Worryingly, there were more impacts with a child target wearing a backpack and an adult target using an umbrella. So a key takeaway from this paper is to be especially careful when you're using an umbrella or wearing a backpack. But on a more serious note, we're pleased to see that the federal government has implemented an Australian design rule for pedestrian detecting AEB, with ADR 9801 beginning to phase in from August next year. However, we don't yet have suitable standards for cyclists or motorcycle detection, and ADR set minimum performance standards. So I think this really highlights the important work of ANCAP in pressuring manufacturers to get these systems to market. There's obviously a limit to the number of tests that can sensibly be conducted, but the ANCAP protocols are helping to push vehicle manufacturers to develop these systems to reach their full potential. The other paper that got me excited was from our Swedish friends on the proposed speed limits for the 2030 vehicle. I'm going to touch on the speed aspects briefly because there are some interesting points of note. The paper considered the maximum acceptable impact speed in different crash configurations. And then with consideration of pre-crash auto emergency braking, safe travel speeds were defined. These are shown in the figure on the right. There are a few interesting points in this. There's variation in acceptable crash speeds for heavy vehicles and light vehicles, and this acknowledges their different mass and physics. The very low speeds for pedestrian zones are due to the fact that there's no acceptable pedestrian impact in this paper, is what they considered. And this is because any impact with a pedestrian can result in a fall and a head strike, which can cause death or serious injury. So there was a real focus on prioritised pedestrian zones. It's also of note that some of the travel speeds listed in the figure are slightly higher than I think we'd normally talk about as being sort of best practice. And that's because the level of safety of future vehicles in the 2030 vehicle for this paper, and also the contribution of AEB in reducing those impact speeds. I think more relevant to this discussion on vehicle standards is the choice of the 2030 vehicle and some of the specifications for it. The average age of cars in Sweden is 10.4 years, which is slightly younger than Australia, 11 years. And on this basis, a 2030 model vehicle was estimated to represent the lowest level of safety in the Swedish car fleet in 2050. This approach will be relevant to Australia, or maybe even earlier than 2030, given the age of our fleet. We currently see serious crashes involving 20-plus-year-old vehicles, so the approach seems sound. And I think we'll continue to have those older vehicles unless there's a big change in how the transport system operates or vehicle ownership models. The paper also made assumptions around the level of safety of the 2030 vehicle and how it operates. The vehicle must be compliant with road rules, and that means it will have a limiting intelligent speed assist system. The vehicle should also not be capable of, well, this is because the vehicle should not be capable of being operated beyond the speed at which it can automatically brake to mitigate a serious injury. The vehicle must also have systems to prevent distracted or impaired driving, and these systems can mitigate, because these systems can mitigate against unsafe gaps and can reduce, which unsafe gaps can reduce the effectiveness of AEB. Vehicles should have an external structure and airbags that are forgiving to vulnerable road users. The paper specifically notes cyclists and motorcyclists, and this comes back to that point around pedestrian crashes being unacceptable. So these requirements are in addition to the features that we already see in vehicles with a high ANCAP or Euro NCAP safety rating, and what's being required by the European General Safety Regulations. So I'm going to finish by reiterating some points from the conference and presentation, which is that AEB for vulnerable road users is good, but darkness can be a challenge. ANCAP is great and does important work, and the 2030 motor vehicle is super important for our future goals. I've included a photo of a cyclist and motorcycle airbags from the expo as well, just because I thought they looked interesting. So I know I've digressed a bit off from vehicle safety standards, but in a safe system, we can't consider vehicles in isolation. We must also consider how they're used, the environment they operate in, and at what speeds they. And this consideration is really critical to the work that we're currently doing at the TAC. Natalie asked us to include a comment about the most impactful policy as a takeaway from the conference. So I'm going to focus it on this 2030 vehicle, because the decisions that we make in the next few years, the features that are fitted to vehicles and the regulations that are made, lane keep assist, ISA, driver monitoring systems, protection for vulnerable road users, and expanded AEB systems are very likely to impact our 2050 goals. And the sooner we can make those decisions, the more hope we have for our 2030 goal. That's me.
Thanks so much, Blake. It was a really interesting snapshot of some of the hundreds of presentations that were made at the ESV conference. So I think you've got some really good ones there. And I like the focus on this 2030 vehicle because it's really something that researchers, automotive manufacturers, regulators, and other industry associations and the like can focus on to help achieve those 2050 goals.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So now we have Sam Dakey presenting. Sam is a research fellow at the Centre for Automotive Safety Research at the University of Adelaide, and he spent more than 15 years with CASA researching topics to progress automotive safety. Today, he's going to present an overview of some of his findings on event data recorders, and I think this is a short summary of the presentation that he made whilst at the conference there. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Natalie, and thanks for the invitation to present here. ESV, as the other presenters said, is a great conference, and it's hard to get to everything that is good. I'm going to give you a really quick 5-minute overview of what I presented, which is going to be very hard, but I'll do my best. And I do want to give some observations as well from a researcher's perspective, and from someone who's heavily involved in field data collection on some of my observations from the conference as well. So what I presented on was the prevalence and profile of speeding in vehicle crashes using event data as recorders, and this was a big team effort between myself, Giulio Ponti, and Martin Elsgood here from CASA. So we wanted to look at speeding in crashes because there has been a lot of prior studies looking outside the context of the crash, but with event data recorders, we have a new opportunity to look at speeding in crashes. And we wanted to see if the findings of prior studies actually translate to the crash context, and what else we could learn simply by looking at the EDR data. So as Blake alluded to, this is something we've been developing in South Australia for a number of years at CASA, and we get EDR data from written off vehicles. We match it to police reports, hospital injury information, and licensing and registration databases as well. We've been doing about 100 to 200 per year since 2017, and it's something that's supported by South Australian government here and TAC as well. So we had, between 2017 and 2021, we had 639 matched cases. We looked at a subsample of that, bullet vehicles or striking vehicles, which we had 319, and also we defined free speed vehicles, ones that we thought were actually able to select their own speed. Important point to make here, since we're talking about regulation and standards, is that we don't have the regulation on for EDRs in Australia, and this does limit our sample to certain makes. Toyota, Holden, Jeep have been around for a while, since the mid-2000s, and then Subaru, Mitsubishi more recently, and there's a few other makes in there that are less common, like the BMW you can see in the background there. So we found that 20%, 7% of people in a crash were speeding. And when we just considered free speed, this went up to 39. So it's quite considerable. As you can see, the, I suppose, highest number of people are just creeping over the speed limit, low level speeding, but there is a considerable number that are still at those high levels of speeding, which is concerning. And just quickly, what did translate from the non-crash context to the crash context in terms of the profile of who, what, where with the speeding. We found there was a high prevalence of speeding with young drivers, weekend nights, regional areas, low speed limits, and local roads, which was consistent with prior research in the non-crash context. But what didn't translate was a difference between the sexes, and I think this is more of a sample size thing. Well, if we could break down by age and sex, I think we would probably see that it's young males have the higher prevalence as in previous studies, but we couldn't say that was statistically significant from our data. There's also SUVs and newer vehicles have been found to be associated with high levels of speeding in prior studies, but that was US based, and this may be just a difference between who's driving what, where. Other things we learned was that there was high prevalence of speeding drivers on a provisional license, vehicles that were black, grey and red, in single vehicle crashes, in side swipe crashes, on curb road section, mid-block location, and on a wet road. And the interpretation of this can be a little bit tricky to get your head around, but the crash context is different. It's not just the prevalence of speeding that's showing up. It also includes the sensitivity to speeding of that condition. And a good example is a wet road. It's not that more people are going to be speeding when it's wet. Well, I doubt it. But what is happening is when people are speeding and the road is wet, they're more likely to have a crash as well. That condition is more sensitive to speeding. So that's the really quick summary. Of course, look up the paper if you want a lot more detail. There's a lot more to it. Now, just quickly some observations. As Blake said, Natalie asked us to kind of highlight some things that we thought would make a big difference in Australia: a regulation, a policy, or technology. I couldn't pick one, so I've picked three. Just run through really quickly. And I think this was a presentation on heavy crash testing with heavy vehicles, proposing a heavy vehicle versus a light vehicle crash test, and saying that this was equivalent to a 90 km/h light vehicle to light vehicle head-on crash. And I think something like this in Australia could make a huge difference, because we have a fundamental mismatch between what we test to and the speeds that we see on our roads. This is my own bias in terms of field data collection, and that being a focus of mine. But time and time again at ESB, the in-depth accident studies such as GDAS and NAS CDS come up as being used heavily in research. And that's not something we have on a national level here. If we did, I'd call it Aussie DAS. That's that might catch on, we'll see. But I think, the Germans are up to version 4.0 of their GDAS with their in-depth data collection. And it's certainly something that's done on a state level here. We do it in South Australia, but there's no national approach, which I think could give us a lot more evidence on which to base policy. And finally, something I noticed, which was not a presentation that I saw. If it was, I missed it because I couldn't get to every presentation. But this was actually in the display, the exhibition area. And this was something called Driver Emergency Assist, which Mazda had brought out on a car in Japan. I think it's still fairly early in development. I tried to gain as much information as I could from the people on the stand when there was a bit of a language barrier. But my best understanding is that it's a technology that senses what the driver is doing, and if they are asleep or they have a sudden illness, it will actually take over control of the vehicle and just bring it to a safe parked position by the side of the road. And I think if this is something that could be reliably implemented in Australia, it really could be a game changer for us, because we see a lot of fatigue and medical condition as well, crashes and serious crashes. So yeah, that's my observations, and I'll pass back now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sam. And with the event data recorders, it really does provide some interesting insight as to what's happening to or potential contributors to an accident. And I did see some of the questions that came through is what's happening with EDRs in Australia. Well, actually, there is a UNECE regulation for event data recorders for both light vehicles and heavy vehicles. So there is work being done overseas to help capture this information, to regulate it so that it's more accessible. And once you've got data, you can make good decisions around it, can't you? When you do the analysis.
Certainly international regulations, and it's something that we're seeing more demand for, this kind of data here from policymakers, and it's something we'd like to see in Australia for sure.
Yep, great. So now we have our fourth speaker, who's Melissa Cashman. And Melissa is the Assistant Secretary for the Vehicle Standards Policy and Partnerships Branch at the Commonwealth Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts. Melissa's experiences as a public servant, and also I found out, interestingly, as a stock controller for Holden, one of her first jobs. My first job in industry was with Holden 2 Engineering. And also she worked as a forensic investigator for New South Wales Police. And those combined give her broad insight into the importance of road vehicle standards. So Melissa's going to provide us an overview of government policy and regulation today and moving into the future. Thanks, Melissa.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. I don't have a presentation slide. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. I know that somebody mentioned earlier about their testing their IT skills. Mine was tested to the limit. I'm not sure if it's a security, but I'm actually coming to you from my little mobile phone. So no presentation, I'm afraid, it's just me. But I'll shoot through quickly because I can see we're getting a lot of great questions that no doubt we want to get to. And as Natalie mentioned, my team develops the National Road Vehicle Standards, or what we call the Australian design rules. There's currently 154 Australian design rules covering 77 different topics, and all road vehicles, be they trailer, motorcycle, car, bus, ambulance, whatever, all road vehicles must comply with Australian design rules when they're first provided to the Australian market. And that actually includes a lot of used vehicles that enter the Australian market and come through some of our second-hand vehicle schemes, importing schemes. Once the vehicle is provided to the market, responsibility for regulation of those vehicles pass on to states and territories, but those states and territories do ensure in many ways ongoing compliance with ADRs through the model laws, including the light vehicle standards rules and the heavy vehicle national regulation. I have a fixed team. As you can imagine, being a government department, we have a budget, and I employ experts in the field commensurate with the budget that I have and that we can obtain. And so within the resources that I've got, what we try to do is prioritise the Australian design rules that will give us the biggest bang for the buck, if you like. We're currently working on 29 new ADRs, and we're reviewing 26 ADRs that are currently in place. We have a number of consultative forums that we work with people to not only work out the prioritisation of Australian design rules, but also the content, to any extent that the Australian design rules need to be modified to be fit for the Australian environment. We deal with states and territories. We deal with a lot of industry representative groups, both users, manufacturers, road users and things. And we also consult heavily with our Office of Road Safety colleagues that are talking to the broader road safety community. And we're looking how we can formalise that input a little bit more sort of as we go forward. The Australian design rules also have to be developed in accordance with the Australian government's lawmaking system. And I know that some people would like us to go faster. We definitely would like to go faster too, I can assure you of that. But we must make sure that we follow Australia's lawmaking provisions, which I think, broadly we would agree with. We must be able to demonstrate the benefit of the laws that we're seeking to introduce as against the costs that will be introduced by it. And as I said, my team does most of the ADRs, where we do have a couple of other external teams that manage the ADRs for emissions, and also a team that's looking at automation, because automation of vehicles will actually be a significantly different way to the current way that we manage ADRs. And in particular, managing the integrity of ADRs related to the automated system once the vehicle is in road service, as we mentioned. Now, Australia is a contracting party to 2 international treaties related to the development of road vehicle standards, and that puts some obligations on us to act in a harmonised way with with international standards. A couple of people have already mentioned Working Party 29, and my team participates closely in Working Party 29. We've recently been able to start engaging face-to-face. Some of my senior engineers have been able to travel to Geneva to work face-to-face on Working Party 29 work. Whereas over the last couple of years, of course, there's been a lot of work done overnight by video conference to Australia to make sure that we're understanding what's being developed in the United Nations, but also to make sure that Australian conditions are captured in those rules as they're made. There's currently a total of 164 UN regulations, and we've applied 63 of those directly, and we also recognise an additional 38, and that work is ongoing. The primary list for seeing what Australian design rules are coming up is contained in the National Road Safety Action Plan, and a new one was just released in December last year. And if you have a look there, you can see where we've listed the Australian design rules that are a priority for us at the moment. I can attach that link into our chat as we go along, if you like. The hard bit for us is selecting which ADRs are going to be worked on in what order. And we're currently developing a tool that we think will make the process a little bit more transparent, a little bit more easier for people to see where we are, and easier to hold us to account as to how we're progressing through the list. One of the primary things we look for is there a United Nations regulation on that subject? And the reason for that is twofold. The first one is, as has been mentioned before, we're a fairly small economy on the world stage, certainly in terms of entities that are committed to very safe vehicles, and the cost of undertaking the research on all of these, on all of the issues to the level expected by Parliament would be quite onerous for one economy to take on for themselves. The other aspect is that Australia receives about 1 to 2% of the world's vehicle markets. Every time we create a standard that puts an additional or a different obligation onto a manufacturer, it increases the cost of that vehicle, and it may mean that that some other safety features that are taken out to accommodate that cost, or it may mean that the vehicle is introduced, but fewer people can afford the new safety features because the cost of the vehicle is going up. So we really try to work hand in hand with United Nations regulations. We then look at the list of what is coming out of there to see what will give us the most bang for the buck. What is the most number of deaths and serious injuries we can prevent, given the resourcing that we've got to look at them. But we also need to balance up other requirements in the legislation, which is we need to look at ADRs for emissions and also ADRs for anti-theft standards in vehicles. We also need to balance making new regulations with maintaining the regulations that we have in place. And we sort of have a roughly, I think it's about a 2/3, 1/3 split at the moment, depending on what amendments are made overseas. I can chat for a bit about autonomous vehicles, but I will stop right there and leave some more time for questions, because I know there's a few there.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. It was really very interesting, and I think you've got a huge program of work ahead of you if you have more than 50 ADRs, being investigated as draft or updated. So really making sure that you can get a good bang for buck is super important. So thank you for providing that update. So now we're at the time where we can have a look at the questions from the attendees. And I'm going to have a quick look through the list here. Now, I did look a moment ago, and one of the key ones that popped up was essentially what's happening with regulation around event data recorders in Australia, and when might we see some regulation in that space. And I think that's probably one to throw across to you, please, Melissa.
Absolutely. Introducing an ADR for event data recorders is not the problem. There is a United Nations regulation, as you mentioned, for the standards of what EDRs should contain. The problem is in Australia, we're a federated state, and our appetite for, we also need to take into account the broader context around that. And what I mean by that is, for example, in Europe, data that is contained here is considered to be public data and arguably so public data, whereas in the US, the data is considered to be private data. And you can kind of see how that aligns with the culture of the different countries. Australia is somewhere in the middle. But what we don't have at the moment is a no blame regulator, oh no, sorry, a no blame investigative body for road vehicle collisions. So we have data recorders in airplanes, for example. Now, CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, they don't access the data from vehicles because they can take people to court. We want that data to be collected on a no blame basis so that there's nothing's hidden, that the data is public. So it's the Australian Transport Safety Bureau who actually collects the data in the EDRs for aviation accidents. And that they then use that data to do safety analysis. Given there's only about 100 people in the ATSB, so to suddenly thrust upon them the responsibility for looking at all collisions would be a significant ask. We are similarly, the next obvious people would be police, but then they would be conflicted as to whether they should be using the data for criminal investigation versus safety analysis. So we are doing work on that. It doesn't actually fall neatly into my team. We are all about vehicle standards, but we are certainly starting the discussion as to how can we get and then how can we use that data. There's no end of opportunities for using the data, but how do we get it? How do we store it? How do we keep it safe and used for the purpose it's intended to be used?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. And I'm sure one of the questions too that will pop into people's mind is what sort of time frame might that program be working around, if you have any knowledge of that timing?
I don't want to raise any false hopes. It would be a massive task to find a body, so it would be a massive task to create a body that could do that work. And, you know, it would need funding from government, all of those sorts of things. Utilising a body that already exists, but utilising them in a different way, because we're a federated system, would require the agreement of all the states and territories as well. So, look, it's going to be a piece of work. I think also I just wanted to mention, it has come up in other questions as well. The government has funded our department to create a road safety data hub, and they are doing a lot of work to identify and draw together all of that state and territory safety data that has been mentioned. There's a lot of work going on there. The biggest issue at the moment, of course, is states collect the data in their unique ways that they have been using it for their road safety priorities. So now we have to find a way to be able to compare apples with apples so that we can use that data at a national level, and it will mean the same thing for each state and territory.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, now the next question I'm going to ask was posed by Carl Lish, and it's had 9 thumbs up for it, and it goes to this 2030 card that Blake was mentioning, was talked about at the ASV conference. And the question is, how do we stop drivers becoming overwhelmed with all of the technology that's being deployed into the vehicles? And there's a lot of technology being deployed. So how do we stop them becoming overwhelmed and help them to become better drivers in this 2030 vehicle? And I think the response to this question, at first, I'm going to throw it to Blake and also to Carla to add some commentary around, please.
I was going to throw to Carla, so that's good. No, I think that it's definitely a challenge. And I know Carl has asked this question before, so thank you, Carl. Your NCAP did present on occupant monitoring systems, driver monitoring, so I'll let Carl answer that one, which I think will help. There's definitely a space for better education of drivers as to how these systems work, and there's a role there for ANCAP, for ourselves, for vehicle manufacturers at the point of sale. I think the other thing that I like to think, one of the best safety features is one that you don't really know it's there, that you don't have to do anything with. And if safety features can be developed to be at that level, that they only come in and only help you when you need it, then that's going to help with this regard as well. But yeah, certainly a challenge.
Thanks.
And what are your thoughts, Carla?
Thanks, Natalie and Blake. Look, there's a couple of things going on in this space from the ANCAP and Euro ANCAP perspective. Driver monitoring from this year, so from 2023, that's moving to direct driver monitoring, where we're seeing technology in the car to look at the driver's face in particular and their head and their eye movements and analyze those for patterns of distraction or fatigue. So it means that there's, I guess, a more, well, it's called direct instead of indirect driver monitoring now. So a more, I would say, aggressive approach, that the car's actually looking at you and judging whether or not it thinks that you're able to continue driving, and will provide warnings, etc. if it's showing that you look like you're fatigued or distracted. So particularly mobile phone, eye movement can be tracked and put into an algorithm. The other thing in terms of where protocols are going is assisted driving. And this is really about those level 2 systems of automation that you can see in many, many vehicles already, where you might have adaptive cruise control and lane centering operating at the same time. That has, those elements of, you need to put your hands on the wheel, but it would otherwise be automated if you didn't. You are still required to be in control of the vehicle at all times, but you can see that some vehicles now have that technology. It's getting quite sophisticated. The car could drive for some period without you taking control, but legally we're not at that point. And human machine interface, there is a lot of work going on this in global spheres, and that's about both the interaction with the car and the control of the car, how sensible that is for a human to use, how many alerts there are there too many warnings, are they confusing, can you actually push a touch screen, do you need buttons? All of those questions are being considered, and they're with a view to come into future protocol years. So for ANCAP, we're testing protocol years 2023, and then the next change will be in 2026 and again in 2029. So that forward-looking roadmap sets out the kinds of things that we'll be examining in future years, but the work's going on now to identify what should be included. And I think all of those elements are things that will be in the 2030 car. We will expect that it will have assisted driving capabilities. We will expect it will have relatively aggressive direct driver monitoring, and we would expect that it would have potentially better human-machine interface than what it has right now.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Carla. So I know we've only got another minute or so left. There was a question that had quite a lot of thumbs up as well, and this was around future safety features for motorcycles and e-mobility. So when I read this is not so much around what is the car doing to detect the motorcycle or e-mobility, but what are some of the safety standards or features that will be coming out in future on these types of vehicles. And that one perhaps I can open to the panel generally, but I think maybe Melissa and Carla could contribute to that quite well.
Well, I might kick off just quickly. What we saw at ASV in the exhibition area were the motorcycle safety features. So there was a number of bikes and scooters there kitted out with technologies ranging from motorcycle airbags. Yes, they do exist and they have been around for quite a while, which are airbags on the bike designed to prevent you from going over the handlebars. There were also suits similar to some of those things that you may have seen for elderly people, that if you fall, they sort of blow up into a personal airbag and protect you. So I think there are certainly technologies. There's a lot of technologies on bikes. There's obviously work going on in Australia with Bosch doing a lot of work in this space and looking at different radars and sensors and all of those things that we see in cars today around blind spot monitoring, and even AEB can be applied to bikes. So there is definitely technology available. We're just not seeing it on the bikes yet. So that's something that ANCAP's going to be looking at as well.
Great. And I can see someone's made the comments, pity the Q&A is so short. Yes, I agree. We could have made this a 90-minute session, hey, to get through all the questions. There's some really excellent questions there. And, you know, some of the themes that are popping up are around bull bars, regulation on bull bars, you know, vulnerable road users. And there's one that's popped up a few times in slightly different ways around the accuracy of the vehicle speed data that's going into the event data recorder. And I think maybe in closing out the questions, I'm going to ask Sam if you've got any comment on the accuracy of that signal going into the event data recorder as our last question.
Yeah, look, there've been a number of studies looking at that, and the short answer is it's highly accurate. Nothing's perfectly accurate, but it is highly accurate. But like everything, any piece of data, you have to consider where it's coming from and what it actually represents. So, you know, on certain occasions when you under rotation of wheels, such as heavy braking, where you get even with ABS, a certain amount of under rotation, that can cause some inaccuracy. So, like anything, you have to be mindful of what you're looking at, and not just take it at face value. Like everything, it requires a little bit of interpretation as well, but in general, highly accurate.
Yes, and just to add to that too, the speed that you see on your speedo is not the speed that's necessarily going into the event data recorder. So your point to it being highly accurate or quite accurate is quite true. So we're a little bit over time now, so I'd like to call to a close for the event, but really thanks so much to the Australasian College of Road Safety for hosting the event today, and thanks to all of our great panellists and all of the great attendees with all of your excellent questions. I know I'm definitely going to be thinking about some of these questions for the rest of the afternoon. It's been a really wonderful session, so thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing you again soon.